I died in an abandoned building. The surroundings were silent and deserted. A perfect location chosen by Ethan Cooper. Jessica Chan concluded her instructions. There's a distributor who wants to speak with you. They're dissatisfied with your product. Go calm them down. Coincidentally, the assistant had been called into a meeting, so I went alone. It also just so happened that my tire was punctured by nails, forcing me to pull over and check. That was when a group of thugs dragged me into the abandoned building, forcing me to drink bottle after bottle of cheap, pungent liquor. In my days, I heard voices. Ethan said to do whatever you want with her. The physical pain left me breathless. But what stung even more was hearing them mention Ethan Cooper. It didn't take long for me to piece together what had happened that day. The suburban meeting. The nails on the road. Every so-called coincidence was orchestrated by Ethan. But why? I had spent over 8 years working for their family, giving my loyalty and tireless effort, practically building half of their empire at the cost of sleepless nights. Ethan and I were childhood friends who grew up together. Even when we had professional disagreements, I was always the one to back down and apologize, ensuring he never bore any resentment. Unless this was because of Bella White. The day Bella resigned, Ethan stormed into my office. Drunk, he flipped my desk and destroyed the project I had spent an entire night completing. June Taylor. If not for you, Bella wouldn't have ended up like this. She's such an innocent girl. It's all your fault. I couldn't understand how Ethan viewed people, but arguing with a drunkard was pointless. Picking up my car keys, I walked past him and tried to de-escalate the situation. Ethan, you're drunk. Go home and rest. But Ethan shoved me to the ground with full force. You sent Bella on that trip on purpose, didn't you? I couldn't answer. That night, he pushed me into the corner of the wall, breaking my tailbone. I spent 2 months bedridden in the hospital and couldn't walk properly on rainy days due to the lingering pain. That bone-deep ache taught me the truth behind Ethan's actions. Recent rumors had surfaced that Bella was pregnant. Director Taylor, what do you think? The pungent smells of sweat and alcohol disappeared, replaced by the rich aroma of coffee. I realized I was sitting in a spacious, brightly lit executive conference room. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, warming my skin. In front of me stood Ethan Cooper, his hands firmly on the table, his expression resolute. And I understood. I had been reborn. To the day Ethan planned to bring Bella White into the company. Don't worry, June, Ethan assured me. Your salary won't be affected, and your team will still report to you. Bella will just serve as an intermediary between us. Before I could respond, an older executive from the finance department spoke up, his voice trembling with anger. Ethan, do you even hear yourself? What nonsense is this? Mr. Davis, in his 50s, usually avoided conflict and focused solely on retiring peacefully. But his reddened face betrayed genuine frustration. Ethan's proposal was absurd. Bella White, his longtime protégé and close confidant, was nothing more than a recent graduate. She studied music and lacked the qualifications for such a high-level position. I had spent 8 years climbing to where I was, drenched in sweat and blood. Yet here Ethan was, casually deciding my fate. In my previous life, I had questioned him. Are you sure? She just graduated. Ethan, who had only been running the company for 3 years, stubbornly pushed forward despite the collective opposition from veteran executives. Back then, I fought. But after surviving that abandoned building, I was too tired. Effort should be rewarded. Yet Ethan taught me the story of the farmer and the snake. This time, under their gazes, I smiled radiantly. Sure, Mr. Cooper. Ethan was momentarily stunned, then relaxed, smiling with relief. I'm glad you understand. But before he could finish, I interrupted. Mr. Cooper, I formally submit my resignation. I hadn't taken a single day of my 10 vacation days this year, based on the standard 1-month notice for resignation. Today at noon would be my last day at the company. I hadn't even finished speaking when Ethan Cooper slammed his palm onto the table, a clear sign that he was truly angry. In the past, I would have immediately lowered my head, apologized, and abandoned any decisions I thought were right. After all, working under someone's roof wasn't much different from the ancient practice of selling oneself into servitude. The most important thing was keeping the benefactor happy. Ethan Cooper was my benefactor. But today, I finally wanted to buy my freedom. Mr. Cooper, I'll send my resignation letter to your inbox and HR's as soon as possible. I gave him a polite smile and left the meeting room. Ethan's expression darkened so much that it seemed like water might drip from his face. It wasn't supposed to be like this between us. Ethan and I were childhood friends. We grew up together. When I was 10 years old, Mr. Cooper adopted me from the orphanage and brought me into the Cooper family mansion. First, Ethan treated me like I didn't exist. Later, when we entered middle school, he probably realized I wasn't a threat, so his attitude softened a bit. He started waiting for me to walk to school together and occasionally invited me to lunch at school. Once, a boy in our class mocked me, saying, "June Taylor? Isn't she just Ethan Cooper's little child bride? But hey, maybe that big nerd is boring in bed. Maybe even Master Wu wouldn't want her." That day, Ethan happened to show up to walk me home. Without a word, he raised his fist and beat the boy until his face was covered in blood, forcing him to kneel and beg for mercy. Mr. Cooper had to spend money to settle the matter, and then grounded Ethan for a month over summer break. When I brought him meals during his punishment, he was playing video games. Suddenly, he paused the game and barked at me. "June, do you really think you're some kind of child bride? There are plenty of housekeepers in this family. You don't need to do this." I stopped bringing him food after that. But then, late at night, he came knocking on my door. "June, I don't understand this question. Can you help me?" Ethan rarely studied, but I patiently taught him from the basics. After all, both he and Mr. Cooper had saved me from a life of despair. Back then, I thought to myself, Ethan is so good. Mr. Cooper is so good. I'll dedicate my entire life to repaying them. That's why I joined Cooper Enterprises as an intern before I even graduated. That's why I worked harder than anyone else. But I never imagined that one day, I'd repay their kindness with my life. June. The moment I opened the meeting room door, I saw Bella White. She was slender, dressed in a slightly cheap-looking white chiffon dress. Yet somehow, the dress accentuated her aura of fragility, making her look like a delicate, pitiable flower. That moment, her face was filled with panic and guilt. She grabbed the hem of my sleeve and said, "June, Ethan told me about you. He said you're amazing. I just want to work with you. I don't mean anything else." In my past life, it was those very words that made me take Bella into my department. I assigned my best subordinates to personally train her, and even scheduled regular one-on-one meetings with her, all to help her rise quickly. But Bella didn't perform well at all. She barely paid any attention to her work. Once, I sent her to get Ethan's signature. She stayed in his office the entire afternoon. When I walked in, she was massaging Ethan's shoulders. "Sorry, June," she said with an innocent smile. Ethan looked so tired. "I'll head back right away." Ethan waved dismissively. "Let her stay." Then he picked apart every detail of my presentation, making it clear he wanted to put me in my place. In the end, I worked overtime to redo the project while Bella rode in Ethan's sports car, gazing up at the starry sky. Now, having lived through it all once before, I looked at Bella. For a fleeting moment, I caught a hint of smugness in her expression. I suddenly smiled. Ethan always believed Bella was a resilient, pure flower, but he didn't realize that the flower he nurtured could only survive by clinging to a stronger branch. "Congratulations on your new position, Ms. White," I said. Bella's face lit up with a smile, though she quickly masked it with a look of surprise. "Oh, June," she exclaimed. "I can't," I said, shaking my head. "But I've already submitted my resignation to Mr. Cooper. I'll start my leave next week. Since the timeline is tight, why don't we start transitioning responsibilities this afternoon?" As soon as I finished speaking, the room fell silent. Bella White's face suddenly turned pale. Of course, someone as delicate as her couldn't possibly handle actual work. "Don't worry, Bella," Ethan Cooper reassured her, emerging from the meeting room after what seemed like a heated discussion with the other executives. He looked exhausted, but his expression softened when he saw Bella's worried face. "Ethan," Bella said, her voice trembling, "did I upset June? Is that why she's suddenly leaving? But I really admire her. I truly do." She looked on the verge of tears. I nearly rolled my eyes at the overwhelming green tea vibe she exuded. Unfortunately, Ethan seemed oblivious to it all. With his emotional blindness, he simply said, "June, come to my office. Don't forget, I'm still your boss." I followed him into the CEO's office, the air between us thick with tension. I understood the situation perfectly. Their plan had been simple. I would do the work, while Bella would take the credit. I was renowned in the industry as June Taylor, and with me laying the groundwork, Bella could step on my shoulders and shine even brighter. As long as I stayed, Bella didn't need to do anything, nor did she need to know anything. She could remain the perfect, delicate flower they both cherished. The only flaw in their plan? Me. "June, do you really have to be so stubborn?" Ethan asked. "If you apologize to Bella right now, I can pretend nothing happened in the meeting room earlier." I remained silent, looking at him. He seemed to think I was hesitating, perhaps reconsidering my decision. "Think about it," he pressed. "How many times have you gone against me in the past few years? If not for the fact that we grew up together, Cooper Enterprises wouldn't have tolerated you for this long." He assumed the appearance of someone magnanimous, as if letting me stay in the company was already an act of leniency. But were our arguments truly because I was being unreasonable? Or was it because the young Mr. Cooper, barely 3 years into his role, needed to establish his authority by undermining me at every turn? "Mr. Cooper," I said calmly, "if there's nothing else, I'll take my leave, no matter how many times you ask. My decision remains the same." With a loud crash, the picture frame on Ethan's desk fell to the ground. It was a photo of the two of us with his father, taken the year we graduated high school. The frame, old and slightly worn, had been my graduation gift to him. Now it lay shattered on the floor, a symbol of the 2 lifetimes of ties between us that had finally come to an end. I hesitated for only a moment before walking out without looking back. What followed was like a carousel of protests. The senior executives took turns visiting Ethan's office, voicing their objections to Bella's appointment. But in this life, perhaps because I had angered Ethan too much, no amount of persuasion could make him retract his decision. Bella White was now the new director of marketing. Ethan stood firm. The transition was quick. Bella, as expected, barely paid attention during the handover, nodding absently and saying, "Got it." But as soon as I walked out the door, she darted into Ethan's office. "Ethan, I don't know if I upset June," she said, her voice delicate. "She spoke so quickly this afternoon. Could you explain it to me again?" One time, as I passed by, I saw Bella leaning close to Ethan, their faces nearly touching. The atmosphere between them was charged, as if the next moment would lead to something more intimate. I smiled to myself. The more they indulged in their relationship, the better it was for me. The better the gift I prepared for them, the more exciting it would be. On my last day at the company, the entire department bid me farewell in tears. My assistant, Christian, even clung to me, wiping his tears on my white suit. "June, if you're leaving, why not take me with you?" he said. Chris had been with me for 4 years. Smart and capable, I had watched him transform from a fresh graduate who couldn't articulate a sentence properly into someone who could now handle major tasks on his own. Good subordinates, like good bosses, are hard to come by. But even so, I gently pushed him away. "The last thing I need right now is your loyalty," I told him. "Stay at Cooper Enterprises for now. Wait for me to come back and get you." Chris froze for a moment, then wiped his nose on my suit one last time. After he had calmed down, I opened the blinds in my office. "June," he yelled, "why haven't you packed yet? Are you going to keep Bella waiting?" That day, I left the company under the complicated gazes of my colleagues. That day, June Taylor, who had dominated the industry for 8 years, disappeared. But I knew the show I had prepared was about to begin. As I walked out of the building, I happened to run into Bernard Chen, the wealthiest man in the country. In my previous life, Bernard's encounter with Bella White had not been orchestrated by me, but Bella's silence had made me the scapegoat. It seemed as though my decision to send her on a business trip had led her to meet Bernard, resulting in her being forced into drinking and losing her dignity. I became the first snowflake that triggered the avalanche. But in reality, I had later learned from my subordinates that the restaurant chosen for the meeting with the supplier was Bella's decision. A high-end place in Harbor City that was so expensive it nearly made the supplier faint when paying the bill. Coincidentally, it was also Bernard Chen's favorite spot. The meeting had ended, yet somehow Bella had gone back to the restaurant. When I first heard about this, I nodded and dismissed it. I even spent a weekend casually mentioning it to Ethan, hoping to comfort him. People have their own ambitions. I had said, maybe Bella is living her dream life now. But Ethan snapped at me. June, why didn't I realize before how cruel you are? She's just an innocent girl. How could you think she's capable of scheming like that? Don't project your baseless assumptions onto her, just to make yourself feel better. It was my mistake. I had forgotten that in the past year or two. Ethan no longer believed a word I said. He would scrutinize every work proposal I made, let alone trust me when it came to shattering Bella's illusion of innocence. In this life, I understood that kind advice was often hard to swallow and ultimately pointless. So, I decided to let Bella herself put on a show for Ethan. I didn't do anything drastic, just sent an email, posing as Bella, to Bernard Chen's secretary. The proposal was hastily pieced together from old materials, but the key was the photo attached to the signature line. It was one I had carefully chosen. Bella's expression was sweet and delicate, her features bearing a striking resemblance, 7 parts out of 10, to Bernard's late wife and the women he had dated over the years. This was Bella's real secret to climbing the social ladder in my previous life. And in this life, it became my invitation for Bernard Chen. Despite rarely leaving Harbor City these days, Bernard accepted the invitation and stepped into Cooper Enterprises. He even sat through Bella's incoherent presentation with a composed expression. Without blinking, he said, "Miss White did well. Let's start with a $100 million investment to test the waters." Ethan was both surprised and delighted, so much so that he ended Bella's internship early and signed her full-time contract immediately, solidifying her position as department director. That night, I was lying in the bathtub when I received a message from Ethan. "See, June, even without you, the world keeps turning. Maybe even better than before." I smiled and turned off the screen because, 10 minutes earlier, I had received another message from Chris. Bernard Chen's secretary just asked for Bella's contact information. I heard it myself. Sipping my wine, I suddenly felt curious. What expression would Ethan have when he discovered the moment Bella, his pure and innocent little flower, finally climbed the social ladder? In my previous life, Bella had been taken back to Harbor City by Bernard only after he discovered she was pregnant. Until then, she had continued to play the role of an innocent little flower at Cooper Enterprises, pretending to be pure and demure. One day, I even came across a trending topic about Bella and Ethan Cooper. The CEO of Cooper Enterprises sponsors a female student for years. Their photos together exposed. One photo was from 4 years ago, when Bella had just started college, young and innocent. The other was a recent shot. She had shed her youthful naivety and now stood confidently beside Ethan, dressed in professional attire. What a perfect match. I'm obsessed. A delicate little flower who worked her way to the side of a CEO through her own effort. Forgive me for being blunt, but Ethan's expression even 4 years ago wasn't exactly innocent. I didn't even know Cooper Enterprises sponsored students in underprivileged areas. It all clicked immediately. Most likely, this was yet another ploy from the PR department, burning through the year-end budget to buy ad space and butter up Ethan. But it worked. Social media exploded with fans shipping the two, even creating a dedicated fan base. With the surge in popularity, Cooper Enterprises saw its pre-sales for the Singles' Day shopping event multiply several times over. Ethan was riding high, rewarding the PR team with an extra month's bonus. He even personally responded to comments. "Thank you for your blessings. Bella is a hard-working girl. I'm still pursuing her." The fans went wild, cheering him on. But I heard that Bella declined the PR department's suggestion to register a social media account and respond to comments herself. "I'm not good at saying the right things," she had said. "Besides, I still have so much to learn. I'm not worthy of Ethan yet." I understood immediately. There was likely another big fish Bella hadn't caught yet, so she wasn't ready to close the net for Ethan. Still, her backup plan smiled indulgently. "Bella, you're more than worthy. Don't worry. I'll wait for you. Chris told me the atmosphere between the two had become so charged it was practically tangible. But unfortunately for them, this happened during a cross-department meeting attended by 40 to 50 people. It was already 8 p.m., and the grumbling stomachs in the room were louder than the dialogue of this real-life romance drama. Yet no one dared complain aloud. Chris, ever the troublemaker, faithfully documented the dialogue in the meeting minutes, which were then circulated company-wide the next day. The next morning, the administrative staff were snacking on sunflower seeds at their desks while reenacting the scene. Hey, Lisa, don't forget to send me that report this afternoon. Okay. Oh, Sarah, I'm terrible at this stuff. I'll never figure it out. It's okay. I can wait. When Bella walked by, her face was almost frozen in embarrassment. She later confronted Chris, her tone sharp, but his innocent expression was unshakable. Director White, Chris said with wide eyes, didn't you once say my meeting minutes should be recorded word for word? I was only following your instructions. Bella's eyes reddened as if she might break any second, but she had no rebuttal. As he was right. Bella could remember Ethan's preferences, even which areas of his shoulders needed more pressure during a massage. But work details? Never. Once, after being teased by an older executive, Mr. Davis, with a jab about her being too young to have memory issues, Bella fled the meeting room in tears. She later scolded Chris privately, accusing him of not taking accurate notes. What are you even doing in meetings? She had snapped. From that point on, Chris typed furiously in meetings, even developing carpal tunnel. When Ethan and Bella were in the same meeting, Chris messaged me privately. I feel like an automatic script generator for a CEO romance novel. Sometimes, it's practically R-rated. On the day I left Jiang City, I had the misfortune of running into Ethan Cooper, dressed sharply in a tailored suit. He looked down at me from above. June, are you leaving for a vacation or to find a new job? He asked confidently. He had every reason to be smug. After all, my departure from Cooper Enterprises hadn't been on good terms. Given Cooper's influence in Jiang City, no other company would dare hire me. The troublemaker. If I wanted a new job, I'd have to leave this city entirely, tail between my legs. If you're thinking of coming back and swallowing your pride, I might still be willing to give you a chance, he said, his tone steady and assured. He even reached for my boarding pass and glanced at my destination. Nice choice. Good scenery. Perfect for a holiday, he remarked. Take another week off, then come back to work. Same position as before. What do you think? Ethan Cooper's casual tone and faintly mocking expression felt so unfamiliar to me. Did he really see me as nothing more than an emotionless puppet? Someone he could humiliate and discard, only for me to crawl back to Cooper Enterprises out of gratitude to his family? In my previous life, maybe I would have. But the June Taylor who had already faced death would not. I pulled the boarding pass out of Ethan's hand. That's a pretty funny joke, Mr. Cooper. Turning on my heel, I walked away without looking back. From behind me, I heard his voice, frustrated and angry. June, you drive me crazy. You're as stubborn as a damn rock in a latrine. A rock? So what? Even the legendary Monkey King was born from a stone, wasn't he? Without stones, we wouldn't have masterpieces like Dream of the Red Chamber. Yes, I'm stubborn. And yes, I have a temper. But over the years, every challenge I faced, I overcame by gritting my teeth and standing firm. Out of all the things Ethan had said recently, this comparison to a stone somehow felt like the most fitting. Better to be a resolute, unyielding stone than a fragile little flower bending in the breeze. I followed my memories from my previous life and found a small guest house. The owner, Nelson Chung, was a painter who spent his days creating art in the courtyard. He was young, passionate, and full of idealism, just like I had been when I first started at Cooper Enterprises. With nothing else to do, I pulled up a stool and sat in the sun, chatting with him. After a few days, we became friends. When Nelson heard about the absurd experiences I'd gone through in Jiang City, he was indignant on my behalf. That guy Ethan is a complete idiot. If I were him, I'd just hand the company over to you. You'd focus on running the business, and I could focus on painting. Wouldn't that be perfect? I smiled, sipping the pu'er tea he had brewed. and let a wistful expression cross my face. 8 years of this. I'm tired. Maybe this is the perfect chance to step back while I still can. Nelson opened his mouth, as if to argue, but hesitated. In the end, he turned back to his canvas. I sipped my tea in silence, waiting for the right moment. Few days later, rumors started spreading about the CEO of City Enterprises embezzling funds and fleeing abroad. The following morning, as I was heading to the breakfast shop at the corner, I ran into Nelson. He had swapped his usual loose-fitting casual clothes for a shirt and slacks, clearly dressed for a formal occasion. I raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Family matters," he said, shaking his head. Then he gave me a complicated look, lingering for a moment before turning away. In the end, he didn't say anything else. "Take care," I said simply. There was no rush. I could wait. Sure enough, while Nelson was gone, a headhunter reached out to me. "Did you interview with City Enterprises? Their people seem to be asking around about you." I didn't reply, spending my days as usual in the courtyard, basking in the sun. Let them dig. 3 days later, Nelson returned. It was late in the evening, and the alley was quiet. He knocked on my door, his face weary, as if he had just weathered a storm, but there was something new in his expression, a sharpness, an unfamiliar resolve. "June," he said, his gaze steady, "I have a proposal to discuss with you." Jiang City's Cooper Enterprises and Harbor City's City Enterprises were similar in size and history. Both lost their founding leaders around the same time 3 years ago. Ethan had rushed back from overseas to take the reins of Cooper Enterprises after his father's passing, while Nelson Chung, the young heir to City Enterprises, had hired a professional manager to serve as CEO. Aside from the annual shareholders' meetings, Nelson had stayed far away from company affairs. People mocked him for handing over a thriving empire to someone else. But after enduring years of suppression from Ethan Cooper, and now with a second chance at life, I was ready to play my next move. I always thought Nelson Chung was a smart man who understood the value of delegation. As someone with a background in the arts and even some international acclaim, there was no reason for him to abandon his career to run a business himself. Knowing how to choose and trust the right people was enough. That's why, in this second chance at life, I saw Nelson as a promising partner. Besides, I remembered that it was around the time Bella White entered the picture that the scandal of embezzlement at City Enterprises came to light. Nelson would need a new professional manager, and I needed a position higher than just a department director. So yes, moving into his guest house was intentional. I wanted to be the June Taylor he met in those quiet days, the woman who shared sunny afternoons and casual conversations with the local artist. Not just a cold, impersonal resume buried in a stack of A4 papers. That way, when the time came for him to decide who to trust, I'd be the first person he thought of. "June, what do you think?" Nelson asked, his outwardly calm demeanor betrayed by the faint sheen of sweat on his brow. He had already made me an incredibly generous offer, yet I stayed silent, hesitating. People rarely value things they gain too easily. That was a lesson Ethan Cooper had taught me well. I waited for Nelson to come back to me, not once, but 3 times. Though he had offered to multiply my previous salary several times over, a paycheck alone wouldn't suffice. I didn't want to remain just another replaceable employee, a mere pawn in someone else's game. When Nelson came back a second time, I brought up the topic of equity and demanded a risky percentage. I fully expected him to balk, to accuse me of greed. After all, business negotiations are a game. I'd ask for $200 when I really wanted $100. While the other party, even if they had $200, would pretend they only had $20. Nelson grew up in this industry. I assumed he'd play the same game. But instead, he agreed almost immediately. "All right," he said. "I'll discuss it with the lawyers and bring you the contract to sign." Then, like an eager puppy wagging its tail, he practically bounced out of my room. I was stunned. The negotiation had gone so smoothly. It barely felt like a negotiation at all. It was as if I had taken advantage of him entirely. Even when I flew with Nelson to Harbor City to finalize the deal, it all felt like a dream. Just moments ago, I was still in that filthy abandoned building. And now, I was June Taylor, the new CEO of City Enterprises. After signing the contract, Nelson looked visibly relieved. Years later, I would still find this moment amusing. Nelson, I asked him once, why did you trust me so easily back then? We'd only known each other for about a week. For once. He looked up from his easel and replied, you proved your loyalty and capability during those 8 years at Cooper Enterprises. There was no need for me to doubt you. Hiring you as CEO was the best investment I've ever made. He paused before adding, June, you're incredible. Except for that guy Ethan. Everyone knows that. On my first official day as CEO of City Enterprises, another story involving Cooper Enterprises went viral. Unfortunately for them, this time it turned into a nationwide scandal. It started with a series of new advertisements. One for lingerie proclaimed, without this, how can you outshine other women in the workplace? Another for hotel showed a scantily clad young woman smiling at the camera, with a voiceover saying, even at a cheap hotel, you could meet your soulmate. And then there was one for hygiene products. Studies show women's body odor is 3 times worse than men's. Use this product to fix it. I couldn't help but laugh. With 70% of Cooper Enterprises' customer base being women, this kind of ad copy was practically career suicide. But it didn't surprise me. In my previous life, I'd assigned Bella similar tasks. Her work back then, let's just say it was so out of touch it made me feel like the world was one giant farce. I tried to explain things to her. Our target audience is women. You need to adjust your perspective. But she'd only looked up at me with tearful eyes. June, am I really that dumb? I was so scared you wouldn't like it that I showed it to Ethan before sending it to you. He thought it was fine. So I submitted it. That time, I already knew neither of them was suited for this line of work. Bella White was just using Ethan Cooper as her shield, and I didn't bother to teach her anything. Once her tears dried naturally, the issue was over. So when I heard Ethan had made Bella the director of marketing in this life, I found it amusing. Go ahead. Let her try. I thought,